The pandemic changed a lot about workplace culture. Part of that shift is employees gaining more power in the workplace. Now, terms like quiet quitting and quiet firing have entered the conversation. Quiet quitting is when an employee pulls back from their duties at work while still remaining employed. Quiet firing is sort of the opposite.
Quiet firing is a subtle pushing out of an employee in their workplace. So being pushed out, usually with the intention for you to quit.
Janice Gassimasare is a diversity, equity, and inclusion and workplace consultant.
The main allure with quiet firing an employee is that they leave on their own. So when you quietly fire an employee from an employer's standpoint, they don't have to pay unemployment, they don't have to pay severance. You can avoid some of the litigation that may come with letting go of an employee. So if you see that an employee is not performing, or there are sometimes other reasons why you want them to be pushed out of the organization, quiet firing is like a very subtle way to do that.
And Gassimasare says this isn't new.
The great resignation really sparked a lot of these conversations around what is causing employees to be burnt out and disengaged. And I think that the offshoots of the great resignation were quiet firing and quiet quitting, where there's a lot of empowerment that employees feel, and they're very outspoken about their wants and their needs and their desires. And I think there's pushback from leadership where there's almost like this loss of control and loss of power that is felt.
Gassimasare says the people most likely to be quiet fired are the workers that are most vulnerable.
Marginalized employees are more likely to be quietly fired. So if you are from a racially marginalized group, if you are an older employee, right? We see this a lot where older employees, rather than just outright firing them, which could be an age discrimination lawsuit, you can do different things to push them out of the workplace.
It can also be certain types of employees.
And then also, if you are more outspoken in your workplace. So if you are very outspoken about the things that you see and about different leaders and different people, you may be targeted.
And finally, proximity can be a factor.
In hybrid workplaces, remote employees are more likely to be quietly fired, simply because there's a proximity bias where employers are favoring and are preferencing their employees that actually come into the office physically.
We've talked about who is experiencing quiet firing and what it is, but how do you know if it's actually happening to you?
There are very subtle signs, and then sometimes they can be more blatant. You may see that you're left off of an email, or you weren't invited to a particular event. At later stages, it can actually manifest as maybe a performance improvement plan where you are, put on some sort of like development plan, which indicates that you're not performing in your role. And this is good from a organizational standpoint because it kind of saves employers from litigation. If they have put you on a performance improvement plan, you're not improving or excelling. It's a way to avoid being sued.
But an employer could just get rid of someone who's costing them money or not performing at their job. Gassimasari says it's not always that simple.
There's a lot of hesitancy with employers to directly outright fire someone, understandably so, right? If you don't have a logical reason to fire someone, they may come back and file a claim or sue the organization. So I think that that coupled with the fact that a lot of people aren't equipped to give developmental or critical feedback. And I think that rather than giving the critical feedback that an employee needs to grow and to thrive and develop, there is hesitancy around that. So it's easier to not give that feedback at all, especially if you feel like the employee will not be receptive to the feedback.
And all of this could make showing up to work and pitching in even harder.
It can take a huge toll on someone's mental well being because, again, the quiet firing that takes place is often so subtle that you question sometimes your own your own experiences and ask yourself, am I making this more than what it is? It's sometimes very difficult to tell these micro exclusionary behaviors.
If you're concerned that you're being quiet fired, Gassimasari says it's time to start keeping track of what's going on.
I would take note of any sort of exclusionary behaviors or indications that you're being quietly fired, because if you bring it up to management, they will ask you, what are the signs, or what are you seeing, or what are you experiencing? Take note of patterns of behavior. Write down every instance and incident that happens where you feel like it was an example of quiet firing.
Then don't keep that information to yourself.
I would suggest either bringing that to your direct manager, or if you don't feel comfortable because it might be your manager that's quietly firing you, I would say bringing it to your human resource department. Sometimes the environment is just not one in which you're able to thrive and to grow. And if that's the case, and you've brought these things to the attention of the necessary parties and nothing changes, I would say that you can either change your opinion or your mindset about what you're experiencing, or you can start looking for new roles.
Employees are only one part of the conversation. Gassimasari says that leaders who are actively doing the quiet firing also need to be held accountable.
Rather than having a direct conversation with them to help them grow and develop, rather than giving them the tools that they need to succeed, you engaged in a sort of passive aggressive behavior of quietly firing them with the hopes that they would leave, or you wouldn't have to pay them unemployment or severance. And so I think it's almost like a cowardly action. And so I think that's why a lot of leaders are not open with their experiences engaging in quiet firing.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nicole Ellis.